Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and as always told, our voice of radio. So today we need to have a look at what is going on with the World Championships metagame. You see, right now, over in Japan, they are playing essentially, not 100%, but essentially with Shrouded Fable, which of course is a TCG set which is going to be released and legal for the first weekend of Worlds. As in for the first time at the weekend of Worlds. Worlds is only one weekend, but that weekend will be the first time Shrouded Fable's legal. Now, it's not perfect, because Japan are playing with Night Wanderer, and essentially, Shrouded Fable is Night Wanderer, but for instance, we've got that ridiculous Petrarunt promo, which can donk, which can literally do 100 damage, turn 1 going first, that as it stands at the moment, Japan doesn't have. There might be other cards in Shrouded Fable that aren't in Night Wanderer. The set's a little bit bigger than Night Wanderer, we don't know. So a small caveat here, that there might be some differences, and of course there are cultural differences between how we play and how Japan plays, etc. You know, Gardevoir was not the all-encompassing super powerful deck in, well, the previous meta in Japan, but by the time we got to NAIC, it was the by far, no question, hands down, best deck in the format. And I know it didn't actually win, but it was just dominant all weekend in a way that it never had been over in Japan. And the early days of that format in Japan were completely dominated by Dragapult. And by the time we got to NAIC, that was a deck that a bunch of people were playing that didn't really make any noise. So I'm showing this to you as kind of a first look at the world's metagame, okay? I am not saying that this is going to be the world's metagame perfectly. I am not saying it's going to be exactly like this. But I'm saying that as an opening gambit, as a starter for 10, as a first look at how Worlds is going to look, this seems pretty gosh darn spot on. Good? Good. Because there is one S-tier deck and it's Charizard. Now this comes from Pokécar_book over on Twitter, who's basically gone and looked at all of the gym battle winning decks, 350 of them, over in Japan, and gone, this is, from the actual data available, this is what we've got. And the number one deck is Charizard, which is super interesting to me. Before NAIC, so 2 formats before where we are at Worlds, it was the unquestioned, at least most played deck, if not the best deck. It was phenomenal. And then NAIC came around, and there were a couple of people, don't get me wrong, that made day 2 and did alright with Charizard, but it was very much a fringe good deck. It wasn't the best deck. It is now apparently the only S-tier deck. Want to know something else which is a little bit weird? They're generally being played with Dusknoir. Now, I'm not saying they're all being played with Dusknoir, let's be clear. I am not saying that at all. But I absolutely am saying that there are a significant number of them that are being played with Dusknoir. Now, generally, they're being played as a 1/1/1 line, but the new Dusknoir is absolutely legit. Now, the way it basically works is we've got Dusknoir, and I'm showing you obviously the illustration rares because they're stunning. We got Dusknoir and we got Dusclops, and basically what they allow you to do is KO yourself, and then Dusknoir lets you choose one of your opponent's Pokemon and drop 13 damage counters, and it is choose one Pokemon. You're not spreading 13, you're putting all 13 on one. And Dusclops lets you drop 5 damage counters. So Dusknoir 13, Dusclops 5. But remember, Charizard's attack gets more powerful the more prize cards your opponent has taken. So what this allows you to do is drop a bunch of damage counters while also beefing up your attack. And it's not just Dusknoir. Not every deck is playing Dusknoir. Although weirdly, Dusknoir is the main big card we see a lot. And this is making a big difference. As a side note, we do see a number of different aspects here. The lists that are going more control will obviously play Heroes Cape. That's been pretty standard for a while now. But the lists that are just generally going for your more traditional attacking way, they are actually going along the lines of, well, there's a couple different ones. Reset Stamp is a big one that we're seeing, but also Maximum Belt is coming out for that big extra smash. So there are a couple of different options people are playing here. I don't think we really settled down on what is the best list of Charizard, but I do think we're at a good stage here where we can say, as it stands at the moment, and things are liable to change, but as it stands at the moment, Charizard really does seem to be the number one deck in the world's metagame. Remember, we said that about Dragapult and NAIC and everything changed, so just hold your horses a little bit. Over in A tier, there's a lot of what we would expect. Raging Bolt remains a very, very good deck, but remember, Raging Bolt was kind of a fringe deck. And then we saw Teal Mask Ogerpon coming out, and that changed everything. Raging Bolt's got a really good setup attack, lets you discard your hand and draw 6 cards for a single colourless energy. But mostly, it lets you discard as much energy as you like from your field and do 70 damage for each one discarded. But then we brought in your Teal Mask Ogerpon that lets you attach a grass energy while drawing a card to each of them every turn, and all of a sudden you've got much more energy on the field while also having a draw engine, and that makes a very big difference. Obviously, we play with Professor Sada's Vitality to get energy on the board as well, and this adds up to a big, smashy deck. There doesn't seem to be any major differences between how the deck was and how the deck is, but Cornerstone Mask does seem to be becoming a little bit more popular. It was seeing a bit of play in the deck previously, seems to be a little bit more popular. It prevents all damage from attacks done to this Pokemon by your opponent's Pokemon that have an ability. Obviously, with Charizard being the best deck in the format, that becomes a much, much better option. Dragapult is still a phenomenal deck. It never stopped being good. It's still got gigantic HP. It's still got no weakness. And it's still got, as the lovely Joe Bernard calls it, the best attack in the game, because for 2 energy does 200 and drops 6 damage counters on your opponent's bench Pokemon. It's still a phenomenal deck. The deck hasn't gone anywhere in terms of how great it is. In terms of how to play it, we still don't know. There are many different ways to play the deck. You can play it as a Lost Zone deck, and that does give you access to really good single prize attackers, things like Cramorant for the early game and things like Sableye to drop extra damage counters. So there is a strong argument that this is the quote-unquote best way to play the game, or the deck. But again, we don't know that for certain. You can just play it with Charizard. That was a good deck at NAIC. It was a good deck in Japan pre-NAIC. It remains a good way to play it now. You can still play it with Arceus as a very consistent list, which still absolutely works, has done the whole time. You can still play it with Pidgeot, because again, consistency and all of that. There are a myriad of different ways to play this deck. We still haven't come down on the best way to play it, but it is worth pointing out that it is still a very, very, very good deck. It is going to be a top contender come Worlds. Gardevoir, after absolutely crushing at NAIC, remains again a top contender. It was the advent of Monkey Dory and Reset Stamp, kind of, because remember they don't all play Reset Stamp. Although looking at Japanese deck lists, the majority of the ones I'm seeing are playing Reset Stamp, just to be clear. But it is not the only way to play. We've seen Hyper Aroma to give you that, that's what Stefan played for his second place list at NAIC. That's still a great card. The theory with Hyper Aroma is that if you go first, then on turn 2 you can play Hyper Aroma, get all of your Curlier, and then start setting up immediately, and it just gives you that big boost, so to speak. That big consistency spike turn 2 if you had to go first. So that's good. But it's mostly Reset Stamp. And then Monkey Dory, of course, which can move damage counters around, bearing in mind that you're already dropping damage counters with Gardevoir EX when you accelerate your energy. So being able to move 3 damage counters from one of your Pokemon to one of your opponents, clearly a phenomenal thing that works very, very nicely. Again, there's nothing huge from Night Wanderer that's really made some gigantic difference in Gardevoir decks. it just remains a very, 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 very strong deck. And we can say the same thing about Lugia. Lugia remains a top contender because use Lugia, get your Archeops out, accelerate a bunch of energy, and you go and smash. And we've still got the new tricks from Twilight Masquerade. Having access to Blood Moon Ursaluna is great. We still see Wellspring Mask Ogerpon played for the bench damage and all of that. That is still absolutely a key part of a lot of lists. And obviously Legacy Energy as your ace spec of choice remains absolutely phenomenal. It just forces your opponent to have to take an extra prize. Like, clearly that's brilliant. But again, we're not talking about some huge new deck here. We're not talking about some massive innovation, some influx of this deck was nowhere before and now it's come out of nowhere and now it's amazing. Nah, mate. Same deck. It just remains incredibly good. But the other deck, which is in the A tier, is Regidrago V-Star. We saw a little bit of hype for this coming around for NAIC, and we saw a couple of players having decent day 2 runs with Regidrago, but it's fair to say it wasn't setting the world on fire. It wasn't coming out as an unquestioned top deck or anything like that. And yet, fast forward, it does seem to be a real top contender in the world's metagame. Big difference here is this one does have a new trick, by which I mean 2 new tricks. Remember, Regidrago V-Star can copy the attacks of any dragon Pokemon in your discard pile. So the theory is you just get Regidrago rolling and then copy a bunch of attacks of dragon Pokemon in your discard pile. And a lot of these are the ones that we kind of knew were coming. Obviously, you've got Dragapult, which is amazing, and obviously you've got Raging Bolt, which is amazing, and obviously we've still got Hisuian Goodra, which is really, really good as a do damage while reducing the amount of damage you take back. So you're basically turning yourself into a much better tank at that point. Again, these are all cards that were played with it back at NAIC in the old metagame. So none of this is new. But there are 2 new cards which have joined the fray, 2 new attacking options which are very, very relevant. Firstly, Kyurem. And Kyurem is the card that's got all of the play. Kyurem is the one that everyone's heard about and everyone is talking about. And what we've got from Kyurem is a ridiculous attack that does 110 to 3 of your opponent's Pokemon, which is ridiculous. But you've got to discard all energy and it takes 5, but with Regidrago it only takes 3. And you still have to discard all the energy, but the theory is you're getting so much benefit from it, it's totally worth doing so. But you've also got the ability here whereby if your opponent's got a card with Colress in its name in a discard pile, you can use it for a single energy. So the theory is that if your opponent does get a Colress card in the discard, you just play it and use it. And if they don't do that, you can still copy it with Regidrago. And if your opponent isn't playing Manaphy, for instance, this is a card that can absolutely wreck. Make no mistake about it, this one card does make a big difference to how good Regidrago is. It's not the only new card we see in the deck, however. We've also got the new Haxorus, which is one no one's talking about, but single fighting energy. If your opponent's active has any special energy attached to it, instant KO. And again, this is a card which is too awkward really to play well by itself, but whack it in the discard pile. And then if your opponent has any special energy, all of a sudden Regidrago comes in and wins. You will incidentally have to still use the Grass Fire combo on Regidrago, but it's an instant KO on anything with special energy. I think you're probably going to be okay. Now those are the S and A tier decks according to Pokécard Book, who really is following this very closely. There are a bunch of B tier decks I just want to point out. Here's the whole graph on the screen. And you can see there some old favourites, Chenpao, Miraidon, Lost Zone, Roaring Moon apparently making a little bit of a comeback, was not great last format. Ancient Box is still there, But United Wings is apparently legit now. I know it's a B tier deck. It's not a top tier deck. But pre-Shrouded Fable, there is absolutely no way United Wings is getting onto a graphic like this. The difference here is Dartrix. The advent of Dartrix does a couple of things. Firstly, it means that you've got 4 more Pokemon, 1 Pokemon, 4 copies, that can be put into the discard pile to fuel the United Wings attack. Does 20 damage for each Pokemon with United Wings in your discard pile. But also it hits a new weakness. And of course it hits a weakness against Charizard, which is the unquestioned best deck in the format. And you know what? Maybe that's enough. So there we go. That is your first look at the World's metagame, what the best decks in the format are when we get to the World Championships. And it's a little bit of a surprise. Having Charizard as the unquestioned best deck, that is a bit surprised. Having Regidrago being quite so good, not that much of a surprise when you remember the new cards. Some of the B tier decks are surprising, but of course they are B tier decks. Let's not go too far over the top. And what we see is the same kind of decks that we were expecting and that showed up at NAIC, but they've been switched around a little bit. Do not expect this to be the actual perfect metagame when we get to Worlds, but do expect it to be a good starting point. So there we go. That's what you need to know. And now it's over to you guys. Tell me which of these decks you're excited about. Tell me your predictions for Worlds. Tell me anything you want to tell me in the comment section. Go nuts. Be nice. And then make sure you like this video, subscribe to this channel, follow me on Twitter at TheWasi. That's where we talk about Pokemon and a whole bunch of other card games. And please do consider checking out patreon.com/PTCG Radio, where you can support the channel, get some bonus podcasts and all kinds of fun things. But by far the most important thing as always, look after yourselves till next time, would ya? Thank you very much for watching. My name's Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.